Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to let go of this China thing. This is bad. Since we last spoke about China, and we've been talking about China a lot, they're more aggressive than they were yesterday. They're more aggressive than they were last week and last month. They are moving ships into the South China Sea. They're threatening all of their neighbors, Vietnam, the Philippines, now in the East China Sea. They're threatening Japan. They are on the move. Things are happening right now as I speak to you. I want you to check out, please, this brief news report. Go.
One patch of sea, 6 rival claims. China calls almost all of the South China Sea its own, but also lay claim to parts of the sea. A key transit lane rich in fish and possible energy
I want to
reserves.
stop right there. Just look at this, ladies and gentlemen. Seriously, let's take a look at this. I'm looking, I'm taking a look at this. That's all right. Just look at this. China's all the way over here. And they're laying claim to the South China Sea and the coastal areas all over here. It's never had these territorial areas. And it's not only laying claim, they're showing you the military ships and so forth, to the navigable waters. It's laying claim to all the air above it. So that would mean commercial airlines, it would mean freighters, it would mean military aircraft, and then you would need China's permission to use the airspace as well as the navigable waters. Now, our administration's position is we're not taking any sides. Everybody needs to get along, and we ought to leave the navigable waters open and the airspace open. A passive, impotent position by a passive, impotent president of the United States. He attacks the American citizenry more than he condemns what Red China is doing. Red China has now seized, for all intents and purposes, this part of the globe, where $5 trillion in commerce passes through every year, not to mention its critical need for the United States military, the Navy and the Air Force. So this is incredible. The effects it has on South Korea, the effects it has on Taiwan, Philippines, that's an ally. That's an ally. Indonesia, that's an ally. Vietnam is coming to the United States begging us for help. But there's more. Go ahead.
China raised the stakes by placing oil rigs in the waters claimed by Vietnam and artificial islands in the Spratly and Paracel Island groups, areas also claimed by Vietnam and the Philippines. Manila seeks international justice, but China wants bilateral talks. When the U.S. sailed a warship near the islands, Beijing called it provocative. The U.S. says it's not taking sides, but wants freedom of navigation. It's also boosted maritime security aid to the Philippines and Vietnam.
It says we boosted aid to Vietnam and the Philippines. Or remember, if you watched a prior show some weeks ago, we gave them one old Coast Guard ship and one old frigate. I mean, the Chinese are spitting out these modern ships left and right. Almost 10% of their GDP applied to, or 10% of all their GDP applied to their military, while we have slashed ours. It's just incredible, and this is going on. And this has taken place during the Obama administration. There is no way now, no way, that we can dislodge the Chinese from the South China Sea. The only issue now is if we can make it so difficult for them, economically, difficult for them by strengthening up our allies there, where they won't be able to make demands or coerce actions or inaction against our allies and against us. But the next president of the United States is going to have to deal with this. And it is a problem, a huge problem. Now, new photos show China building fighter jet hangars on these disputed islands and these phony islands that they have built in the South China Sea. Check this out. Go.
New satellite imagery shows China's military buildup in the South China Sea continues despite assurances from China's president last year.
China does not intend to pursue militarization.
But these new photos from a Washington foreign policy group say otherwise. Experts say they show reinforced aircraft hangars capable of housing bombers and fighter jets visible on Fiery Cross, Subi, and Mischief Reef. According to the Pentagon, China has built more than 3,000 acres of artificial islands in the past 2 years. That's about the size of Los Angeles International Airport. The runway at Fiery Cross Reef is 10,000 feet long, one of 3 China has built recently.
These hangars are a smoking gun. You do not build nearly 80 hangars for civilian purposes on these tiny spits of land. They're clearly meant for forward deployment of Chinese Air Force assets. They're holding a gun, but they haven't put the bullet in yet, and they're saying that's not threatening.
China's man-made reefs are part of the Spratly Islands, disputed territory claimed by China, the Philippines, Vietnam, and others in the region, where some $5 trillion in goods and natural resources transit each year. Last month, an international tribunal at The Hague found China's claims to the islands had no legal basis. China responded by launching armed bombers and fighter jets to fly over the area. Admiral Harry Harris, head of all military forces in the Pacific, says China is building a, quote, Great Wall of Sand.
In my opinion, China is clearly militarizing the South China Sea, and you'd have to believe in a flat earth to think otherwise.
Since October, the U.S. Navy has sailed warships close to China's contested islands, what the Pentagon calls freedom of navigation operations. China calls the actions provocative. China's actions in another area have also raised the concerns of an American ally. Japan warned China that it is fraying relations between those two countries, both laying claim to islands in the East China Sea.
The link claims the islands in the East China Sea that have never belonged to China. Never belonged to China, but still, Vietnam. This is up to date. Vietnam has discreetly, according to Reuters, fortified several of its islands in the disputed South China Sea with new mobile rocket launchers capable of striking China's runways and military installations across the vital trade route, according to Western officials. Diplomats and military officials told Reuters that intelligence shows Hanoi has shipped the launchers from the Vietnamese mainland into position on 5 bases in the Spratly Islands in recent months, a move likely to raise tensions with Beijing. The launchers have been hidden from aerial surveillance and they have yet to be armed, but could be made operational with artillery rounds within 2 or 3 days, according to the 3 sources. Vietnam's foreign ministry said the information was inaccurate without elaborating. It's accurate. And so it goes. China has indisputable sovereignty over the Spratly Islands and nearby waters, China's foreign ministry said in a fact statement. China resolutely opposes the relevant country illegally occupying part of China's Spratly and islands and reefs, and on these illegally occupied Spratly Islands and reefs belonging to China carrying out illegal construction and military deployments. The United States is monitoring developments closely. Incredible. Japan, the South China Sea, the East China Sea. Japan warned China, Reuters, that ties were deteriorating over disputed East China Sea islets, and China's envoy in Tokyo reiterated Beijing's stance that the specks of land were its territory and called for talks to resolve the dispute. They go in and they just grab them, or they lay claim to them, with no basis whatsoever. The diplomatic tussle comes amid simmering tension as China builds on outposts in the contested South China Sea, including what appear to be reinforced aircraft hangars. Ties between Asia's 2 largest economies have been strained in recent days since Japan saw a growing number of Chinese Coast Guard and other government ships sailing near the East China Sea islets called the Senkaku Islands in Japan, and the Diaoyu in China. The flurry of Chinese incursions into the waters follows a period of sustained pressure on China over its activities in the South China Sea, and China's criticism of what it sees as Japan's interference in that dispute. Japanese Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida called in Chinese Ambassador Chung Yang-hua for the 2nd time since Friday and told him China was trying to change the status quo unilaterally. The Japanese Foreign Ministry has objected. Now, what are we supposed to do about this? There's a lot of things we should be doing about this. Number 1, we need to rebuild the United States Navy, which, of course, like everything else that's good in this country, has been unraveled and undermined by this president. And we need to rebuild it now. takes a little while to build a ship. Number two, we need to forward deploy too. Not talking about American forces, but I'm talking about American armaments of the kind necessary to address what China is doing, and ring, as far as I'm concerned, the South China Sea, and ring that part of the East China Sea that Japan and China share. Number three, what else should we do? You know, Donald Trump made a proposal similar to something that I've been proposing a long time. Not because I've said it, he probably never heard me say it, but I think it's crucially important. Just as North Korea now has nuclearized, that's right, nuclearized, with the assistance of China, quite frankly, it is time that we allow Japan and some of these other countries to do exactly the same thing. I'm not talking about full-blown nuclear programs. I'm talking about tactical nuclear weapons. Not that I want them to be used, but we're now in a different era. Things have changed as a result of Barack Obama. When they see weakness in the enemy, they act. It's a provocation. Weakness is a provocation. They're acting. China's acting. North Korea's acting. Russia's acting. And I'm going to discuss that at great length tomorrow, as a matter of fact. So, what do? Well, North Korea has nukes, and South Korea relies on us. Japan has no nukes, and I could go on and on. Japan is the third biggest industrialized country on the face of the earth. Did you know that? Who's number two? Well, now it's China. It's China. So we need to help Japan muscle up, give them advice, give them technology, give them what they need in terms of defending themselves. So it's crystal clear that we're not going to stand for this and our allies are not going to stand with this. Instead, we get these namby-pamby comments. The administration says, look, we're not going to get involved in specific disputes, but, you know, the water should be open, the air should be open, and you guys work it out. Maybe we'll give a few ships to the Filipinos and the Vietnamese and, you know, a couple of old frigates and maybe an old Coast Guard ship and so forth. That'll scare off China. You saw what they're doing. And then if you watched the program a week or two ago, the RAND Corporation report, I showed you area after area after area where we had a definitive advantage over the Chinese military, where area after area after area we have less of an advantage, and in some cases no advantage at all. And the upshot of that was that by 2025, in 10 short years, it's not at all clear that we could quickly defeat the Chinese military in that sphere of the world, the South China Sea and the East China Sea. This is what happens when you unilaterally disarm. This is what happens when you embrace a moronic foreign policy which does not respect your own country's superpower status. Barack Obama inherited a superpower. He inherited the biggest, strongest military on the face of the earth. Now, it's still the biggest, strongest military on the face of the earth, but no thanks to Obama. The other militaries are picking up, while ours is being degraded from within. So this is going to continue to be a massive problem. You know, we talk about China. We hear the candidates, particularly Trump, talk about China when it comes to trade. We should be talking about China when it comes to national security. That's when we should be talking, especially emphasizing the problems we have with China.